War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Greetings, comrades, and welcome back to another episode of NYC Foodways, your weekly food and culture discussion from the cultural capital of the world. My name is John, and this week's episode is dedicated to Vitold Paletsky, who, as an officer in the Polish resistance during World War II, volunteered to get sent to Auschwitz in order to gather intelligence. He managed to escape, lived to tell the tale, fought in the Warsaw Uprising, and was ultimately murdered by the post-war Polish government. Your dumbass fictional movie hero could never. In November of 2008, a series of arrests in central France made headlines across Europe. The very serious and somewhat vague charge of criminal association for the purposes of terrorist activity was leveled at the accused, a group of 9 young people who lived and worked communally in the rural village of Tarnac, and who the French state believed, or wished to make others believe, were responsible for the disabling of a high-speed rail line. Despite overwhelming evidence in the favor of the accused, massive prosecutorial bungling, alibis exonerating many of the defendants, straight-up illegal activity on the part of the government, and countless outright lies by the avatars of the French state, l'affaire Tarnac dragged on for a decade. In 2018, the group was finally cleared of all serious charges and were released with minimal or no penalties to be served. In the end, it was clear to all that the defendants simply held the wrong viewpoints about the French government, about capitalism, about the way society should be organized, and about the way we should behave towards each other. If holding the wrong viewpoints is a crime, and it would seem to have been so in the case of the Tarnac 9, then it is most certainly thought crime, one of the many words invented by George Orwell for use in 1984. 1984 is the rare book that altered the language it was written in. It is why we refer to things that seem pulled from its pages as Orwellian, and why so many of the words and concepts invented for this book have entered our dictionaries and imaginations. The language of 1984 can refer to both the way Orwell wrote it, spare and razor sharp as always, but also to the language invented for it, that is, the language of Newspeak. Of all of the innovations of 1984, or predictions of things to come, Newspeak is both the most dynamic and the most dramatic. The totalitarian government of 1984 sought to eliminate certain concepts, freedom for example, or true love, by literally removing these words and their meanings from the dictionary. By shifting the very terrain of thought, language, in order to shift the terrain of life, the party is attempting and succeeding in effecting complete reality control. Old Speak, what you and I would refer to as English, was gradually giving way to Newspeak, the language of Ingsoc, a Newspeak word that stands for the English Socialist Party. Ingsoc itself, and the Newspeak it promulgated, had historical progenitors in phrases such as Nazi, short for
Национал-социалистическая Arbeiterpartei.
Comintern, short for the Communist International, and as we discussed a couple weeks ago, Gulag. The attempt was to make speech, Orwell writes, and especially speech on any subject not ideologically neutral, as nearly as possible independent of consciousness. Potentially dangerous words, and the concepts behind them, were replaced by ideologically correct words so that, following the eventual and total replacement of Old Speak by Newspeak, a heretical thought, that is, a thought diverging from the principles of Ingsoc, should be literally unthinkable, at least so far as thought is dependent on words. Orwell continues, to give a single example, the word free still existed in Newspeak, but it could only be used in such statements as, the dog is free from lice, or this field is free from weeds. It could not be used in its old sense of politically free, or intellectually free, since political and intellectual freedom no longer existed even as concepts, and were therefore of necessity nameless. Damn. So, thought crime, the crime of unorthodox thinking. In the world of 1984, even our thoughts are not our own, and thoughts, the language that brought them into existence, and the consciousness behind language, are controlled by the most Orwellian conceit of the book, doublethink. Doublethink is a Newspeak word describing the fundamental premise by which the party operates, that it is possible to hold 2 conflicting ideas in your head at once, and to believe them both to be true, or either, or neither, as it suits you, as it suits the party, in fact, Every hellish aspect of the book is predicated on the adherence to this notion that cognitive dissonance no longer existed because there was no longer anything dissonant about holding conflicting beliefs as long as they supported the needs of the party, because the very language used to formulate thoughts was being shaped by the party itself through the development and implementation of Newspeak as the default language of thought and communication. And what of our own political parties in this world? What of their use of cognitively dissonant language? What of, for example, the war on terror? Who in their right mind, yeah, obviously you f***ing sheep were not of right mind, could believe that it is possible to wage war against a feeling? Isn't the very feeling of terror precisely that which war brings? Why are our wars waged with machines and weapons named for the eradication of the very peoples they are named for? And does anyone remember freedom fries? Or has all of this been successfully flushed down the collective memory hole? Orwell created dozens of Newspeak words for 1984, but there's one that has always stuck with me: duck speak. To quack like a duck. It is one of those interesting words that have two contradictory meanings. Applied to an opponent, it is abuse. Applied to someone you agree with, it is praise. In the world of 1984, the ability to use language ad infinitum without saying anything is heralded as a paramount virtue. In other words, those who can speak at length without meaning are celebrated. His head was thrown back a little, and because of the angle at which he was sitting, his spectacles caught the light and presented to Winston two blank discs instead of eyes. What was slightly horrible was that, from the stream of sound that poured out of his mouth, it was almost impossible to distinguish a single word. Just once Winston caught a phrase, complete and final elimination of Goldsteinism, jerked out very rapidly and, as it seemed, all in one piece, like a line of type cast solid. For the rest it was just a noise, a quack, quack, quacking. I know you have encountered this person before. How many times has your boss or some other dull, unattractive, awful individual talked at you, or at the room, or at themselves, or at no one in particular, just vomiting forth a pile of speech-shaped noise? I'd advise you to stay away from tech companies if you want to avoid these types. There is one language in 1984, wordless yes, but communicative, that manages to escape the party censors and thought police. Birdsong, a language of its own, foreign, startling, making those who hear it thunderstruck, enraptured by its beauty and honesty. The protagonist of 1984 describes encountering birdsong in a forest clearing. The music went on, minute after minute, with astonishing variations, never once repeating itself, almost as though the bird were deliberately showing off its virtuosity. This is the language of a truly free being, a language astonishing to the enslaved beings of 1984. While listening to the bird express itself, Winston, enraptured, stopped thinking and merely felt. Have you ever had the experience of truly free expression? Have you ever given so fully of yourself, uncaring whether you were listened to, or heard, or even understood? Orwell writes, "For whom, for what, was that bird singing? No mate, no rival was watching it. What made it sit at the edge of the lonely wood and pour its music into nothingness?" Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week for another episode of NYC Foodways. Peace.